Welcome to the R Labs podcast. Our special guest today is Chris Hall. Chris, man, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Excited to be here, Bill. Excited to be able to join and excited for the conversation.
Now, I love when I get to talk to people like yourself who are not necessarily day to day engineers. So you'll have a little different story. And for people out there that are also focused on product and focused on things maybe surrounding engineering, but not actually hitting the keyboard with code, I think it's going to be a great sort of show for you. Plus, I think there are more engineers that need to understand this stuff than not anyway. So hang out with us for the next hour and a half as we talk to Chris. Now, Chris, give everybody like the 2-minute elevator spiel on what you're doing today.
Yeah, definitely. So I work at Otus. So Otus is an education technology company, and our goal is to be able to take all of this information about students that exists in so many different places, and we want to bring it together in one place so that the educators and families who work with those students have all the data and insights they need to make a difference in those students' lives and help them learn and achieve all the amazing things that they can do. I was a seventh grade social studies teacher, and I was really excited to describe what those problems were to the delivery team. You know, we call our team the delivery team, so the engineers and the product team to be able to problem solve. How do we do that? How do we attack that? And it's amazing to look at problems in a very simple way. You know, what's more difficult than it needs to be? And I think that's where engineering and delivery can really come into play to make you more efficient and effective. And we do that by making our tool as easy as possible to use and really putting all that information about a kid at your fingertip.
So is this data for a teacher in the classroom? So it's not what's the word I'm looking for? Like you know what student you're talking about when you're looking at this data, or is it more of a summary at a higher level at the school?
No, that's a great question. Think of it like a medical profile. So you know when you go to your doctor and they have all that information about you, and if you're a normal doctor, you know they know who you are, sure, but they can look at your past lab reports. They can look at this information. Or even if you were thinking in the engineering world, think about this like your JIRA, where all of a sudden it's like, okay, you have all this background information, you kind of know what the epic is, you kind of know what this is, but you kind of want all of that in one click. So this is about a specific individual kid. And because of the magic of data, we can aggregate that information and look at the trends about groups of kids. But really, at the core and the heart of everything, it's about having all of this information, this profile of a single student. So who have they been, who are they now, and also capturing where they want to go. So you can really have all that information in one place.
But beyond, say, assignments and grades, what other
Like
information
what
are you?
actually makes up it? Yeah, sorry.
Because I
Um,
mean, you don't want to you're a teacher, right? Like, so
yeah,
you don't want to put
I
a
was a
burden.
teacher. Yeah,
That's what I meant.
yeah.
When you were a teacher, you know the burden you already have in the classroom. Asking a teacher to have to do more is going to be an impossible request, right?
No, time's the most precious thing any educator has. So yeah, we bring in all the information in District 1. So that could be the attendance. Are the kids showing up to school? That could be the behavior. How engaged are they? Are they so some of these school districts have like behavior tracking, like positive behavior or even participation. But then in addition to that, we also bring in what's happening in the classroom in terms of assignments and assessments. And we wrap all that up with one additional piece, which is what we call those third-party data sets, which would be like ACT, SAT, NWA, any of those kind of statewide or district level evaluations and assessments also get put into play. So anything that really ties to a kid, we can actually put in narrative information as well. So you could get their passions, their interests. They have a voice as well. So you kind of get this complete narrative, both the qualitative and the quantitative nature of everything about a kid from attendance, behavior, grades, performance. And you have that for their entire time in the district. So you really get a sense of all of that in one place.
I want to get back to this conversation because you're going to have to talk about security at some point.
Yes,
But I don't
yes.
want to do it right now. I don't want to do it right now. But I mean, this data is really sensitive. If this data leaks, and it's kids, like but I don't want to talk about that. But it's coming. I'm just letting you know it's coming. What I want to do is sort of get an idea of how you got here to this sort of product and this company, and then we can sort of jump back in there. So I've got to age you a little bit. So what year did you graduate high school, Chris?
Graduate high school 2001 from Newchur High School outside Chicago,
In Chicago. Okay. City
north of
kid. Oh,
Chicago. Be
just
very
just
no,
north
no,
of
no, no, no.
Chicago.
Trust me. If you anybody in the Chicagoland area that hears Newchur, they're gonna be like, that is not Chicago. No, for the relative folks, for the people outside of Illinois, it's just north of Chicago by about 20 miles. But people know Chicago. People don't know Nutria, except I guess I give them more insight. It's unfortunately it's a little pretentious. It's where Home Alone was filmed. So Home Alone is from that
Ah.
area. Same with Mean Girls, Breakfast Club, and some of those John Hughes films. They're all in that area right up there. So um, I apologize to anybody who knows it because they're already shaking their head and saying, "Ah, that guy from there." So
Well, I don't think most of us don't know that, so I think
safe.
you're
Okay,
safe.
it's safe here. Thanks.
Okay, so 2001 high school, north, 20 miles north of Chicago. Okay, I like sort of having that as a reference to where the world was kind of at when you were 17, 18. I mean, you're young. You're a young guy, Chris. It's good. It's good, man.
If you were to tell me I'm a young guy and you ask my four kids, they think I'm ancient. So I appreciate that. It's good to feel the variety. When I was a teacher, so I taught from 2007 to 2018. When I started teaching, I was 23, felt pretty young. By the time I stopped teaching in 2018 and I was past that 30 mark, the kids thought I was ancient. It was amazing. Just like 2 3 years, it was like 23. They thought I was young. 26. No, I was old. It was pretty amazing how quickly that turns depending on who you're talking to.
It is so relative. So like when my youngest two, they're like 20, 22, 21. So when they were like 10 or 12, we were in a store and they were calling me old man already. And this guy that had to be already 20 years older than me, like a Marine, walked in the store and he's like, he's not an old man. I'm an old man, right? So yeah, I mean, it's just so relative, right?
Yeah, they'd meet my great grandfather. He lives just a couple minutes away from us, and he's 96. Now they still think I'm closer to 96 than I am to them, but hey, I mean it's probably pretty close. My oldest is 10. I math, speed math, I can do it quick. So I guess I'm still closer to them, but it's close. It's getting close.
Yeah. But at some point they're like your age. Like I had my first kid when I was 26 and now my oldest is 20, 28, like the other one, right? And I'm like, I had a kid already when I was your age, right? And that's really mind-blowing when you start looking at things like that.
Definitely, definitely.
All right. I want to maybe start with you around sort of high school and uh, you graduate in 2001. That's when you're like 17, 18. Talk about those sort of 4 years up to 2001. What were the things that you were sort of interested in and doing at the time?
Yeah, so New Trier High School is a huge place, 4,000 students. So trying to find your way. I think a lot of you, that's all high school is, trying to figure out what are you passionate about, what are you interested in. It's always hard on these Zoom, I guess it's not Zoom, but these virtual, I use Zoom just with any type of video talk. But I'm 6'7", so I was fortunate enough to play college basketball. So in high school, I was really passionate about pursuing my sports. I played a little bit of soccer, a little bit of volleyball, a little bit of basketball. And so I was really trying to find myself. I think you're really trying to grow into what you want to do. And I had these individuals, these teachers, and then my family who were really trying to guide you. And sometimes in high school, that guidance has to be a little bit more subtle, right? It can't just be overt. Um, but I was fortunate enough to kind of be, guided in the right way with guiding questions. And I was really trying to figure out my passions. I really was brought up to believe that when you find what you're passionate about, you're going to be willing to do the hard work required to be successful. It was a lot of discussion about how hard work was essential. So in high school, I actually got cut from the freshman basketball team, and it was actually posed by my nana, my grandmother. She asked me, like, I was like, do I want to try out again the following year? Do I want to put in the work? And she She really told me, life's a journey, not a destination. And she's like, do you want to do the hard work of that journey? Is that going to be worth it? And so, my freshman, sophomore year was really tons of hours spent pursuing that passion of being able to make that high school team. And that journey of being able to wake up super early, I mean, like 5:30 in the morning, playing basketball before school, after school, working out, it really taught me that when you're passionate about something and you put in the work, you can really solve any problem that faces you. And it's something that at the time I kind of lamented the path I had, the difficult path to kind of make that sophomore team and then to make the varsity team. But looking back at it, I don't think I ever would be the person I am today without really learning that that passion can fuel your desire to pursue almost anything.
I'm kind of curious. I guess as a freshman, you weren't 6'7" yet, but what were you lacking I mean, you had to be tall, I guess. So did you have like a really, because there's 4,000 students, or just a badass sort of team, and so your height and maybe weight just wasn't enough to get on this team?
Well, that's a good, okay. Now we're going. I was 5'8" my freshman year, so five
Oh
eight point
shit!
guard. So yeah, 5'8" point guard with size 14, 15 shoe. They said that I had a really nice shot. I could dribble, but I was slow of foot. I wasn't going to do it. In addition, the team was really quite good. My junior year, I was fortunate enough to make the varsity my junior year. I like to say I was like the 15th, 16th guy on our 15, 16 man team. We did have five college, five D1 athletes. We had somebody who played at Stanford, somebody who played at Marquette,
Wow.
somebody who played at Tulane. Immensely talented group. And it was really one of those things where I was a quiet student. You wouldn't know on a podcast. I think I talk a lot now, but I was a very, very quiet student, quiet person, reflective. And I was just in awe of just how amazing I thought these folks were at basketball. And I always was really, I admired their work. And I'm very fortunate that I was in school with, they worked hard. Everybody ahead of me was working hard. It wasn't like I could say, so I had to work even harder just to try to catch up. So it was a very talented school. It was a very large school. And it's one of those things that once you kind of, where you are at 14, 15 is going to be much different. Even my senior year, I was still coming off the bench. I went on to play in college. I started for, several years in college, and I wasn't my best basketball player until 22, 23, didn't help me much to being in a men's league in Chicago, going to the bar after, but that's kind of when I reached my
Yeah.
basketball
Don't
peak. And
don't
it's,
get don't get ahead of me too far, because I want to
oh,
talk about
sorry,
that.
sorry,
But
sorry.
but I went to a D3 school in upstate New York, and one day I played a pickup game where our star basketball player was in the game, and that kid was like amazing. And my brain went, dude, you're only D3. I can't even comprehend what a D1 player looks like out here if you're not even good enough to play beyond D3. There's just these levels of athletes that are like, the Tom Brady is amazing to me, right? 32 teams, and there's maybe 5 quarterbacks that are elite on the entire planet of 8 billion people. Like, it's mind blowing to me.
I mean, so where'd you go to school in upstate New York?
SUNY Potsdam.
SUNY Potsdam. Okay, so yeah, I know. So I went to Denison University. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, Bill, but it's a D3 school outside Columbus, Ohio, and I can relate to that, right? I'm 6'7". I was very, very, very skinny. I don't know if I want to embarrass myself with just how skinny I was when I entered college, but one of my really good friends, his name's Todd Townsend. He was on that Marquette team with Dwayne Wade, and he was a starter on that team. So he was my high school teammate, one of my high school teammates, one of those talented folks I mentioned. And I was fortunate enough to go up for a summer camp they were putting on, and I got to help it, run it a little bit, not run it, be participating in it as like, a counselor. And I got to play in a couple of these pickup games, and I got to play against Dwayne Wade on the court. I could name other NBA players, but Dwayne Wade's probably the most famous one I've ever played against. And he was just different, built different. And I remember there was a high pick and roll. I got to guard him for a moment. I'm like, I got this. No, he was way quicker, could jump way higher. I'm like, oh, yeah, there is a difference here. Now, I didn't know at the time he was going to become a Hall of Famer in the NBA, but I
Mm.
knew he was exceptionally talented. And I was like, D3, D1, All-American D1, NBA. It's like, yeah, you're talking about the creme de la creme, the top of the top of it. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. And that frames what you can do. It frames kind of your mindset about everything.
It's just amazing. They're not human. It's mind blowing to me, the talent that's sort of there. So, what other things were you interested in high school? I mean, I hear you're working hard to be able to stay, and you're playing with great talent, which is always going to help you. But are you looking at basketball as a way of paying for college at that point? Because I think at that point, you're not playing, right?
Oh,
You're not
didn't think
going
I was
pro,
going to
right?
play. I thought I might be able to play overseas in college. Didn't make it, but I thought that was a possibility. But yeah, I knew I was not an NBA player. I knew that was out of the realm of possibility. At the time, if we go back even a couple more years, school was not my thing. I'm not the smartest person in the room. Again, if you use that same analogy with basketball, right? There's always somebody there. I've been fortunate enough with Otus to speak to some incredibly smart people, I work with incredibly smart people. And I quickly learned that if I was going to be successful, I had to learn from every single person around me, because at the crux of everything is, if you can listen and learn to the people around you, you can get better. And if you can get better every little day, you can all of a sudden make progress. And if you're making progress, you can then achieve that goal you have in front of you. So in high school, I really was just trying to dabble, learn a little bit about this, learn a little bit about that. And I want to do just enough in school to fly under the radar. My goal was not to be the star of anything, but also not to be the focus of anyone. And it was one of those things where I really enjoyed learning my own way. And I could tell anecdotes about that, but I really became passionate about answering the questions that I became passionate about. And those could be anything. I loved sports. So my favorite player at the time was Anthony Hardaway. Like, I wanted to know about him. Or maybe, as a Bears fan, there have been some dark moments in our history, but wanted to learn all about the NFL. So any of these questions, as also a Cubs fan, talk about sports, there have been not many ups in the Chicago fandom. So really, I didn't have a clear path. Instead, I really just wanted to seek answers to questions that I was curious about. And it was one of those things that I was fortunate enough to realize my senior year that I could probably play basketball in college at my height. And I thought that was going to be a chance. And I always worked a little bit at basketball camps. It was an easy way. Hey, I'm going to work at basketball. I know what I'm doing. And I really enjoyed teaching. It was one of those things I felt like I was giving back, imparting just a little bit of that wisdom, a little bit of that knowledge that I had. Always felt good. It made me feel like I knew something. You could find somebody who you might have a little bit of knowledge that they didn't, and you could all of a sudden unlock something in them. I remembered that. I mentioned my friend Todd, who played at Marquette, way better at basketball, way better. But there were a couple little things about basketball that I could show him. Hey, maybe, the angle of this screen, or the pick and roll here, or hey, have you thought about this? And it's like, wait a minute, I might not be as good, but I can still impart. I can still help him grow. And those moments really, that was the coolest part. I didn't think there was anything more invigorating than that ability to help somebody else, to teach someone else. And so kind of gravitated to moments like that where I could help teach this or be supportive here. And
So that
that's
was
kind
your
of what I was
plan.
doing in high
Was that
school.
your plan going into uni, like an education sort of track?
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that if I was a good enough basketball player, I could become a basketball coach. There was nothing I liked more than basketball. And if I could become a basketball coach, all the basketball coaches I knew were also teachers. So, hey, I'll teach and coach. I didn't know if I'd be a college coach or a high school coach, but in college, that's kind of when I realized I'm going to be a coach at the high school or college level.
I mean, if Stan Van Gundy can be an NBA coach, I mean, obviously he's not playing ball, right? How
No,
I
yeah,
saw him
no.
one time, dude. He was like Shaq's waist. I remember one time I was at a game and I went down on the floor, and I'm like, he's just looking up with his neck all the way back, and I'm like, that's amazing to me. Amazing.
Well, I mean, both of them are crazy, you know. I mean, him and his brother. It's like I still remember his brother hanging on by the ankles in that New York fight. You know, he's just trying to hold on. So,
So you're gonna go to college. You're gonna get to play some ball, but yeah, I guess the idea is what, just get the 4 year degree and then and see what happens there. But did
see
you
what
take an
happens there.
education track? What'd you end up
No, I ended up
studying?
getting yeah, that's I ended up you know, I mentioned earlier, I always was curious about certain questions. And so the question that really piqued my interest in college was what makes people think? And I really always like to know, what are you thinking about? What are you thinking? You know, how are you doing? And then it became, how do groups of people think? And what principles or guiding questions or guiding philosophies are really going to help you as a person make the decisions you're making? So I became a political science and world religions major. Um, and it was really one of those things that I thought government and religion were really where people showed what they cared about, what they were passionate about. And if you could figure out what someone was passionate about and cared about and what guided their thinking, you could learn a lot about people. I'm not the most my memory is not the greatest. As a history teacher, that's actually problematic. You know, dates were not my thing, but I always could understand the progression of events, right? Like, oh, the sequence of events. Oh, this happened and that happened, and this is why this happened. And all of a sudden, I got really obsessed with knowing the why. Why did the people do that here? Why did this group of people do that? And I found that so fascinating. I always was curious to, you know, why did people make the decisions they made? And, you know, I dabbled with psychology. I was never that good at it. You know, I did a course here, a course there. But the political science and the world religions really allowed me to understand how large groups of people um, viewed their lives together and individually, and how that really shaped their path forward. And I just found that one of the most fascinating things to learn. I still do. I probably read way too much about, you know, thinking, and that gets into leadership, but it's really about people. What makes a person tick?
It's funny. I had to withdraw out of my college history class because I'm dyslexic with numbers, and I could not get dates. Instead of 1856, I'd write 1865 or something. And I realized pretty quickly I wasn't going to pass this. This was all about memorization and regurgitation, at least this 100 level, like history. And I love history. I love exactly what you're saying. I love to understand the why, right? Where the dominoes are falling and how. But that early history class was all about memorizing dates, and I just couldn't do it.
It's hard, you know. And again, I was lucky enough to find a couple things, you know. I mean, you're just like, I mean, that piece made you need different support. And unfortunately, I think too many educators, too many schools are so concerned about, I mean, life is an open book test. There are very few moments in our life where you don't get that support. So if you have a timeline and you can speak to it, I think that's really where the power comes into.
I'm super curious, especially with you said your great grandfather's still alive in 96.
96, yeah.
What did he do what did he do for a living, man? I want to get a sense of where this comes from. Does it come from your
Yeah.
grandfather, your mom's side? Like, what did they do for a living?
Yeah, so my grandfather is a former sales guy. Is one of those things. He is the most, if for those that know me, I'm very quiet. I often, as I've mentioned here, I like to listen and learn. My grandfather is the most personable man I've ever met in my life. It's one of those things where he walks into a room, or, you know, unfortunately at 96, he's less mobile, but back in the day, he actually was the most active person I met until he was like 89. At 89, 90, he was playing golf 3 times a week, playing tennis. He just, he owned a room. He just walked into a room and he just was the most energetic person. And we would go to, like, he'd take me out to eat at a restaurant. He would get everybody talking, no matter who they were. He could just engage and do it. But yeah, he was a sales guy and he always liked new technology. So he started at, um, I don't know exactly where he started. I'm dating myself. I knew he worked at General Electric. He worked at a company called Quasar. So he was into technology. They had some of the coolest things in their house. Like he had this TV, this like kitchen TV when I was like 5, 6 years old. And it was like he had just had some of the latest stuff because that's what he was doing. And then in the early 80s, I actually just learned this not that long ago. I guess I say that relatively. When I was in college, I learned this. That's still 15, 20 years or 20 years ago. I'm really dating myself, Bill. This is hard. Adding all these
I'm
numbers
older
up.
than you, so don't feel bad.
He actually was one of the first 15 employees at at Electronic Arts,
Wow,
EA
really?
Sports. So he really helped with their sales, distribution, and setup like that at the very beginning, coming from General Electric and some of these things. And it was funny because when I was a kid at like this is like probably 1991, 92, 93, he had stopped working at EA. He didn't work there that long, but he had gotten into computer games. And so he became a consultant as he retired to where I got to try out some of these computer games that never even released it to the market. He was doing some stuff and I was like, he's like, oh, you should see this game. And I think he was doing a little market research with me. I was probably that, me and my brother and sister. So it's one of those things. And then to complete the circle, my father told me his entire life, and there's a funny story that does relate to Otus. My father told me his entire life he was an accountant. So it's one of those things. He ended up being more of a higher level accountant, but it was one of those things where he just, from the beginning, everything was about you need to know the money going in, you need to know the money going out, and you need to be able to understand. But beyond that, he also taught me something pretty cool, which was um, numbers can tell a story. And so he was, a financial reporter of some ways, and so he could tell a story with numbers. And the power of telling a story was really, really amazing. And I kind of share that, Bill, because it's one of those things where my grandfather could tell you any story. He has loved to read, he loved to learn, but he loved people. And that's what, is so hard. He's 96, unfortunately. He's not the same mentally and the same physically. And it's one of those things that's hard because, like, what invigorated him more than anything else was that engagement with people. But he would always tell these stories and he was always get them to tell stories. And it was this kind of circular event. And I learned a similar thing, but in a very different way from my father. I'm much more like my father's personality, but the ability to tell a story. And again, relating it back, to me, that's how people think. People think in stories and people are passionate about the things that they want to tell a story about.
What about your mom? What you, tell
Yeah,
me a
so
little
my
about her.
mom she stayed at home with us and she was an incredible, amazing mother who I don't know if she could have done anything else or anything more for my brother, sister, and I. And we were just beyond fortunate to have her support, her guidance. Uh, she's smart. She's way more emotionally smart than my father or myself ever. I and my grandfather. It's one of those things that sometimes
Yeah.
when you tell all these stories, you become a little disconnected from the real pulse of what's going on. And my nana and my mother, so that would be her mom, they were the ones who really taught me to try. I fail. If you were to ask my wife or some others, I to really be able to understand what makes someone think, so that you can really connect to them because you need to have a pulse on how they're doing and a pulse on how they're doing it, and that emotional intelligence, which I think is often softened and not be as important. It is. I'm telling you, with what I do at Otus, I don't think there's. I think I use that skill more than any other skill. That ability, and when I was a teacher, that was the skill that I use most. How do you connect to I had 150 kids a year. How do I connect to them? How do I make what we're teaching relevant to them? And she did that by really listening and learning from us. What did we need? She didn't always give us what we wanted. Again, I think that word need is important. What did we need to be able to get where we needed to go? But you do that from listening. You do that from learning.
One of my
I
favorite quotes.
apologize to your audience because I say listen and learn a lot. So
One of my favorite quotes is, may you have everything you want, everything that you need in life, and never want anything. No, may you have everything you want in life and never want anything you need." So it's a way of understanding the difference between want and need, right? And it's an important sort of concept to have in your head. You might want that, but you don't need it. And we don't know as kids. A lot of times you don't even know in the present what
No.
what it is you
Huh.
actually need. I always feel like, traits also skip generations. Like, even I see it with my kids, right? They're much more like my father than me in really many aspects. I think if you sat back, I think you'd realize you're much more like your grandfather. Maybe you're just being more reserved than he is, but you open it up, and I would imagine you'd be just like him.
I I think that you I've thought about this actually because I'm fortunate enough. My father, is his father-in-law. My grandfather is his father-in-law. But I think you kind of fall between the two, and I think it's almost easier to see more of yourself in the older generation, just because it's a little bit more exaggerated for you in terms of like you don't see him. Like I saw my grandfather a lot. I was very fortunate. He only lived 15 minutes away from me, but still, like I saw my dad on a daily basis versus however. And so it's one of those things like what you're gleaning. So yeah, I guess I would say that you probably fall between the two, right? I
I
think
like
you like,
that.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I'm somebody who's really good at reading a room. It's rare that and it happens. It's rare that I misread a room. I always say when the math doesn't add up, like alarm bells are going in my head because the math doesn't add up here. 99 of 100 times I'm right, right? Somebody's lying or somebody's trying to misinform me or something, right? I feel you get that. You're able to do that too.
When I was in the classroom, I would have nodded my head and been like, yes, for sure. When I'm in person, I agree. I think that's the biggest challenge I've faced. We used to have an office and now we're remote. The biggest challenge is I agree with you. Like that vibe, that energy, that just sense you get from looking at people and being able to assess them, that energy is vital to connection, to leadership, to all of those things. And it's so much more difficult. Like, we're having this really great conversation, and we're in this pretty cool piece of technology putting us, I'm in the Chicagoland area. You're,
I'm
you're
in
not
Miami.
Miami. Okay. Way warmer. I'm jealous, even more jealous. I shouldn't have figured that out. Um, and it's like, even though we're looking at each other on the screen, I get a sense, right? There's that difference. And so I agree with you there. I'm okay at that, but it's something that I feel like I'm getting out of practice of. Instead of being in that classroom where it's an essential piece of every day of a teacher's life to be able to have that pulse of the classroom. Harder. It's harder in a remote workplace. It's harder when you're not having those small little exchanges, holding the door open for somebody. Or
Well, I
Here at Ardan Labs, we believe in empowering companies to reach their full potential through innovative technology solutions. Trusted by small startups and Fortune 500 companies alike, we specialize in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, development, and now AI. With over 14 years of experience, Ardan Labs has trained over 30,000 engineers and served over 1,000 companies worldwide. Whether you're mastering Go, Rust, Kubernetes, Terraform, or blockchain, we're your strategic partner for performance-grade solutions. Let's elevate your tech journey together. Reach out to Ardan Labs today.
I meet with the few people I work with day in and day out. I at least twice a week. I'll video chat like this, not like a stand up situation. I hate stand up. We're gonna talk about that, but I hate stand up. But like, hey, Florin, how are you doing? Let's talk, and then all the other people on the team, and I'll do this at least twice a week because I don't want to lose what you're talking about. You can get written word is really hard if you don't know somebody, and so just these two conversations a week allow me to understand what's happening in Slack, let's say.
one of the things I learned when you read the written word, you often put your own tone, your own feeling into the words you're reading versus the person's tone that they actually typed. It's a dangerous thing. If you all of a sudden come from a frustrated meeting and you read somebody from a completely different context, you're bringing your own tone to that versus the tone they say. That's why often a time you don't want to. We use Slack. I love the ability to quickly message, but there are some downfalls of Slack. We wouldn't be able to survive without it, but let's jump into Zoom. Or one of the things we really try to do as a company is when we can, let's get together. Even if it's an optional happy hour, even if it's just this, like the more equity you can build for those moments. I really believe sharing a drink or sharing food doesn't have to be alcoholic. I like beer, but it doesn't have to be. But sharing food, sharing a drink, just sharing that time, you build equity with that person. Zooms and that stuff becomes a little transactional. It can be efficient, but it's something you got to be very mindful of.
Yeah, but it's like the people I work with. One guy's in Romania, another person's in Bali, some are in Indiana, some are in Brazil. I'll get to individually meet them maybe over the course of the year, but being able to bring a team like that together in it's
hard.
It's expensive, So, but over time, Okay, so let's get back. So, you're gonna graduate, say uni at this point. You've got what was the degree again that you were focused on?
World religions and political science.
Right, political science. So is everybody thinking now you're going to run for the state legislator? Is like you're going to become a state congressperson?
My world religions teacher thought I was going to become a minister or a reverend, which is funny for anybody who knows me. I'm going to out my institutionalized religion. I sometimes struggle with because I think sometimes when you take these principles that can be meaningful and good, it's hard. It's hard to all of a sudden apply them. And my political science person thought I was going to get not into politics as a politician, but somewhere there. And what ended up happening, you mentioned, I actually thought I could play overseas. So when I left college, I was like, hey, I had a lot of connections of coaching. My buddy who played in Marquette, he played overseas. One of my other teammates in high school, it was played at Stanford. His name's Matt Loddick, best athlete I ever encountered in my life. He went overseas, and I was like, maybe I could do it. And so I knew some people who were training, and it was an opportunity where I'm like, hey, I'm going to go back and get my teaching degree, and I'm going to train and see what I can do, right? I can be in there. I can learn from the coaches. What ended up happening is on two different occasions when I was kind of gearing up, ramping up, serendipity kind of stepped in the way. It was serendipitous, where all of a sudden this conflict came up and then this conflict came up. And all of a sudden it's like, you have a chance to student teach. And I'm like, I'm going to student teach. Let me do that. Like, that's what this path is leading for. And I thought I was going to student teach at the high school level. I thought, okay, high school is where it's at. I want to be a high school coach. I was helping out. And they placed me in a middle school. And I was like, okay.
Middle school's tough, man. No.
And I got to be with it. I got to be with an 8th grade class. And I loved it. 7th, 8th grade. So I actually then, after I'm like, 7th grade's where it's at. 7th graders, they're just becoming themselves. They're kind of finding themselves. They're like, ooh, I'm not just a little kid anymore. I'm becoming. Now, they sometimes think they're more advanced than they actually are, but they still have that little bit of wonder with them. They're still a touch young. And it's one of those things where I just love 7th grade where they're finding it. And I really became enamored with the ability to help guide students at that age.
Where was that? What junior high school was that? And I was in
Springman,
in Illinois.
Springman in Glenview. It's in Illinois. Yeah, and then I actually was able.
So you
to
never went
teach.
overseas. You never went overseas.
Never went overseas
because this opportunity came up.
Yeah, so I student taught at Springman, and then I also student taught at a CPS school. So I was very.
You didn't need a
fortunate.
master's degree to teach in Illinois?
I ended up getting my master's while I got my teaching certificate. Yeah. So when I was there was a year and a half that gap. I kind of probably made it seem shorter than it was, Bill. It was probably a year and a half where it took me to get my degree. I ended up finishing a couple extra courses because of the history stuff. So I actually got a history degree and then a teaching degree. So both of those.
And you stopped playing ball, or you just went intramural?
Intramural. That's where I loved the Chicago bar leagues. It was like I was really pretty good. I could enjoy myself. So I was a student getting my master's at the time, but then I also was a waiter. I also did a little bit of expoing a couple times. My manager was not always a fan of me expoing there, but it was a lot of fun. Um, and it was really fun to be a server at Champs Bar and Grill, the sports bar. Doesn't exist anymore, but that's where I met some really good friends. We played a lot of sports. I played in a couple men's leagues, played a lot of basketball, did school, and then I was fortunate enough to really decide I wanted to teach. And that's where the story of Otus kind of comes into play. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. You're going back, making me remember some fun moments I haven't thought about in a bit.
So how long were you? I'm assuming you were teaching history in that junior high school. Yeah.
Yeah, so Elm Place Middle School is where I taught. That's where I got my first job, Elm Place Middle School in Highland Park, Illinois, seventh grade social studies.
You know, I have this crazy memory of seventh grade social studies. I didn't do well in my seventh grade social studies class, and the teacher made us do these, I don't know, some project where you had to draw and do something. And it was parent night. So he was putting all the work that everybody did on the walls. Well, apparently he put mine next to the front door. I only got a 70 on the project. But every parent that could walk in saw my 70 grade right there because it was in your face. And my mom wasn't happy. It wasn't, she was okay with the grade because I didn't even deserve a 70. But I remember her being upset at the teacher for putting that. He didn't even realize what he was doing, right?
Yeah, he
But
might not have even hung them up. He might have handed them to somebody else and they just placed them.
but I have this weird memory of like, and I loved my history teacher in seventh grade, but I remember my mom like being not the grade, but just I don't know why. Like I'm 55 years old. I can't remember what I had for lunch, but that dumb shit is in my head, you know?
When you're seen like that, right? That was just a huge moment of visibility. Those are the moments that sometimes really stick with you. Not all the moments, I'm sure. I mean, think about the countless minutes you were in that classroom, the conversations, and it's like, no, it's that moment of visibility, that feeling that really lasts.
Yeah. So and you said were you teaching or coaching basketball at that point too, since you were
Yeah,
since you were there?
so I was fortunate enough. So my sixth grade basketball coach, who then became he helped train me a little bit. When I remember I got cut in high school, he was able to help me get a job helping him. So I was teaching, and then I was helping him, and I was helping Glenbrook North High School. So I was helping out there, either with their feeder program or their sophomore basketball team. So I was really fortunate to be able to have that ability to be connected. And so I started teaching in 2007. I replaced somebody who had been in our district for 30 plus years. She was a tornado of energy, Cheryl Levy. She was incredible. Talk about somebody who could connect to kids. Talk about somebody who just got so much done. It was unbelievable what she did. And when I took over for her, she became my mentor. And I really tried to take all of her amazing curriculum and content, and I just needed to make it something that I could use in my classroom. And so in a way, I added a little bit of technology to it, a little bit, I modernized it a little bit, but in some ways I simplified it. At the end of the day, I cared about can my students learn how to read, write, and think critically and independently? And that came to being able to answer 5 questions. Who is this about? Where is this about? When is this about? What is this about? Actually, 6 questions because I forgot to. Why should I care? And how does this connect to something that I know? And if you can answer those questions about any set of information, you can do anything. I truly believe it. Those are the questions that to me unlock anything. And, if that means you're reading something or reading a visual or looking at a bank statement or talking to a sales guy, it's like the basic questions: who, what, when, where, how, and why. And um, that's really what I tried to teach my seventh graders. And I tried to make it about what they were passionate about. So I really gave a lot more autonomy than my predecessor about the what we learned, in terms of like, we would do these current event Fridays. Every Friday we would learn about the current events. And I let them learn. Was it about Taylor Swift? Was it about their favorite video game? Was it about the Kardashians?
Now let me ask you a question, because at least in Florida, at this point, from seventh grade on, it's all about the test. It's all about the test. because the school gets graded, and based on the grade, they get funding. And so I have seen when I was in high school, what you're describing is the education that I got. Even though New York State had a test, it was still very tailored to this type of education. Today, at least in Florida, there's no time for that because that's not on the test. And so I'm kind of curious if you had any sort of also test requirements at the time you were teaching that you had to make sure, and what you think about that now as an educator who maybe didn't have to deal with it.
I didn't have to deal with it as much as I know people do now. It's one of those things where some of my friends tell me I got out of education just in time. So I stopped teaching in 2018. Also, as a social studies teacher, we're not the same as the ELA teachers and the math teachers. Like they really, my wife was a ELA and math teacher before we had our 4 kids.
What is ELA?
English language arts. Thank you for calling me. No, so yeah, language arts teacher. So really it's English language arts. So it's really the ability to read and write. I think that I viewed my job as helping those English teachers and those math teachers with what they needed to do. And really social studies is just the content of understanding information, informational reading, informational writing. I had some requirements. I did, but I was able to, at the time, and I was fortunate that I was able to do it. I kind of might have been a little rogue while doing it. If you could do the skill, you could then apply it, right? On the test, you might have to be able to read a pie graph, pie chart, or you might need to be able to read a short 2-paragraph essay and answer some basic questions about it. Well, as long as my kids could do that in time for the test, I was good. And my kids were lucky enough, they performed really well. I had amazing colleagues. I think they learned everything in the other classrooms. But for me, I really was doing what would now be called standards-based grading at the time. I would break down what skills do we need to develop by when, and let's work together to be able to do it. And one of the things that's really difficult is if you're trying to learn a complex skill, like writing a paragraph summary about something is actually more complex than you think. You actually I have to summarize this. Well, when you're starting off, if you don't have any of that background information, it's like, hey, write a paragraph summary about the United Nations. They have no idea what the United Nations is, the history of the United Nations, why the United Nations created. That's a really hard thing to be able to do. But 7th graders in particular are exceptionally passionate people. And at the time, the Kardashians were big. Again, I'm dating myself. I don't know if the Kardashians was a hit show at the time when I was teaching, or if we use the conversation about me, I'm a huge Bears fan. These 7th graders can tell you all the stats about their favorite team and all these things. They already have it. So let them develop the skill that might be a little bit more complex of bringing in this wealth of knowledge they have and then being able to communicate it.
Yeah, I love
Let's
that.
use with something that's a strength,
I love
so that when we get to the thing that they need to, they've mastered that skill and now they're applying it to the content they need. Yeah, they do need to be able to, again, I did, the colonization in 7th grade, right? The colonization of the United States. So, okay, we can still learn that content, but we can have supplemental, like my current events were only on Fridays. So again, every Friday, let's bring it back to current events. But then Monday through Thursday, we're bringing it to, this history, this moment that you don't even recognize. But again, it's this kind of double emphasis on that skill that's really going to do it. And really, it matters about getting to know your kids. You need to know what your kids are passionate about, because a famous quote that I was taught, and I wish I remembered where it came from, was, you only know what you already knew. And it relates, and to learn something new, you have to relate it to something you already know. And it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's not a very good quote, but it's the idea, we make analogies, we make comparisons. It's like if you've ever seen The Matrix, it's like they never knew what chicken tasted like, so everything tastes like chicken. It's like, because they didn't know, right? You need to know something. And so take what they already know so that you can all of a sudden teach history. All of a sudden you can teach this moment in time. That's really where you can do some fun stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that you need some way to measure progress and measure things. Like, you can't live in a world where especially around education where things aren't measured. I get that. I just wish there was a way to sort of balance out measuring something with, I think, the way that I sort of learned in school. I guess you got there somehow. But um, so when how long are you teaching there? You said you did that for a couple
11
years.
years. So 11
11
years.
years.
So what ended up happening was that teacher I replaced, who had been there for 30 years, I had mentioned she was a rock star. She had so much energy. And this is a story I tell probably too often, but she believed in order to learn who kids were, you should really read their writing. Because it's like, how do you talk to 150 kids, right? You mentioned your staff, right? You find 2 times a week, you get to know them, you get to do these things. Well, how do you do that at scale when you have 150 students? And so she would have her students journal. So they would have a 5-star notebook. They would journal every day. That's how class began. They would take like 3 to 5 minutes. They'd write a journal prompt. It could relate to what we're studying in class. It could be something about them. The journal prompt would change to kind of get them going, known as like a bell ringer or a daily problem. Every weekend, she would take those books home, 150 of them. She'd read every single one and she'd leave a comment. First weekend of my teaching career, I brought them home. I did it. Sadly, Bill, I told myself 8 hours of doing that, I wasn't going to be able to go to the bar and watch college football and be able to have some fun with the folks that I used to, go to service night, industry night with. So I'm like, I got to find a better way. And it's one of those things where you balance efficiency with, being productive. And so I actually was able to use the computer lab. So they would write every day and then they would create a blog. And the blog post is where they would edit one of their favorite posts, add a visual to it, and then I'd read their blog posts. And so that was the beginning of me turning her curriculum into using technology to make it more possible. We've talked about in the beginning, teachers have so much going on. We can't be burdening them even more. And so really what ended up happening is I began to search for technology to help save me time. Well, if I find resources for this material that are online, this is skipping a couple of years, well, then I don't have to go to the printer and wait for me to print 30 copies of this. All of a sudden, when we went one-to-one, one device every kid, all of a sudden I could do things. So I'm actually going to tell that story because I think it's relevant. So in 2007, I started teaching, and all of a sudden I do some things technology-wise. Oh, okay, we're going to do this. Well, I was replacing her curriculum. And so her capstone project for 7th grade was called Project Citizen. Honestly, one of my favorite projects. And it was something that she had done for several years. And it was really about developing citizens out of our students. And so the project was pretty simple. You identified a local problem. The kids voted on it. What problem is impacting you that we should try to solve? These students would have a vote. We would then define what that problem is, again, with those basic questions, and then they would brainstorm possible solutions, talk about a really fun couple days where they could brainstorm any solution, they have no financial restraint, no imaginary restraint, and then they would take all of the solutions they came up with and they would evaluate them for the feasibility of those solutions. And feasibility is one of my favorite words. The F of feasibility, I think, is funding. How much time and effort is this solution going to take? That easy, E-A-S-I, in that word is how easy or difficult is your solution going to be to implement? And then the ability, what's the ability of your actual solution to solve the problem? If you know those 3 things, that's a great way to evaluate if you should do something. How much time and effort is this going to take? How easy or difficult is this going to be to implement? And is it going to actually solve my problem or not? And so I'm learning about this project. It's October. This project doesn't happen really until May. And she told me in October, oh yeah, there's a presentation, this Project Citizen presentation. And I'm thinking back to your story, Bill, about your mom walking into school where she all of a sudden saw that art project, because that moment's critical, right? Her glimpse into your school day is a really, really important moment. Well, she told me, my mentor, Cheryl, told me that in May, my students were going to present their projects to a panel. And that panel was going to be the mayor of our town, the superintendent of our district, the principal, the city council folk, two of the city council folk, and every parent of every kid is going to show up and watch their kid get on stage and make this presentation. And I remember thinking to myself, I will be fired the day after, because there is no way my 150 students who I'm dealing with on a daily basis, that's going to go flawlessly. And she actually used one of my sayings that I often told her is like, control what you can control, right? You can only control what you control. So it's like, control what you can control and it kind of go forth. And so it was one of those things where I did. We broke down the skill. I'm like, I don't know if they're going to be able to do it for a complex, unknown thing. You kind of mentioned it earlier with Florida. Like, well, how are they going to be able to apply these skills to this, like the test? And it's like, she's like, don't worry about that. Teach the skills. And so all of a sudden when it came, the first 8 weeks of this unit were amazing. Their ability to understand the problem, because it was a local problem. It was a problem they were passionate about. Their brainstorming solutions was so amazing. Like, it was about making our school more environmentally friendly. One of the kids is like, we should have geothermal heating. We were in a building that was built in 1890. If we tried to dig underneath our building, that building probably would have collapsed into the center of the earth. It was like, but hey, think about geothermal heating, think about XYZ. Step 3 is enact one of those solutions and then present it. And all of a sudden that project was absolutely incredible. And then what ended up happening is that final week or two, the old school way of doing it was each class would create one poster board of 4, those old poster boards. It was like 4-sided: problem, possible solutions, evaluation, enact. You're doing these things. It's really cool. But it became like, Bill's hogging the glue. Angelo's sitting in the corner talking to Susie. It's like, well, no. What are we doing here? Like, I want it to be about this skill work. So in year 2, I actually talked to my principal and, hey, can I use the laptop cart occasionally? Can I use our computer lab occasionally? And what ended up happening was we were fortunate, and he said yes. Well, then all our research went online. Instead of me printing out all these things, now there's just a website. They found a really great link. Let's add it to our wiki page. My goodness, saves me so much time. Now, I'm not the only one researching and printing, or them showing me and then printing for the next day. It became active. They became the ones doing it. And then instead of us having poster boards, I thought, what are we doing? We're creating a marketing website. This is what any advertising company does. This is our problem. This is why the problem's important to you. And this is this is how we're going to solve it. So they all created websites in 2009. 2008, 2009, 2010. And everybody thought I was this big tech person. And I'm like, no, I just use technology. I used a tool to make me more efficient and effective. And I, again, like to say I like to be a little lazy, again, efficient. And it was pretty amazing. In 2010, long story, you asked the history teacher to tell you the full story, Bill. In 2010, the 6th grade social studies teacher and I, we co-authored a grant where we wanted to take those old computer lab computers, and we wanted to bring them into our classroom to go 1-to-1. When we were going to do that, it was going to cost about $3,000 because we needed to make sure we weren't going to burn down that school, hooking in 25 computers into a classroom that was like so old. In addition, these computers were pretty old, and it was before Apple had slate hard drives, but you could actually add additional RAM cards. So we were going to add additional RAM cards, re-image the computers, just put on Internet Explorer. It wasn't even Safari at the time. And that's what we're going to do. But what ended up happening is that grant, the 6th grade social studies teacher, Pete Helfer, is amazing, amazing educator. He and I came up with this grant, and he's the one who presented it. He was a much better presenter than I ever was. We were fortunate enough to get a larger grant to bring one device to every kid in the social studies department that turned out to be first-generation iPads. Wow. Those iPads came, and we agreed to sell our soul just to get the device. Like, give us the device. We agreed to do the curriculum development. Hey, I'll put all this stuff online. Anybody can use it. It's already doing that. We agreed to do all the professional development. This is before there was mobile device management, before any of this, because each classroom got a classroom set of iPads. This is before there were these carts or all these things. Pete cut up wood, door stops in a door, that like they're that like 45 degree angle. Well, if you take 2 of those It's like the perfect height to put an iPad on to type. So he was in there into what we had a wood shop, another amazing teacher we had in our building. And all of a sudden, his name was Chip Shilkus, amazing teacher in connecting to kids. But all of a sudden, we had these door stops that all of a sudden all the iPads could sit on, and all of a sudden, and what became apparent was, though, I now got into way more classrooms. This is my third year teaching. All of a sudden, I'm getting into way more classrooms. And what ended up happening was it became clear that the technology was obscuring from the real fact of the learning. And we identified 3 problems. And those 3 problems were, 1, the information about who a kid is. This is the first question you asked me, Bill. Their attendance, their behavior, their grades, their information, which used to live in a 5-star notebook in my class, was now scattered across the internet. How do I do it? Sure, all my kids have a blog post, but now that's 150 blogs I have to sort through. Sure, I can do an RSS reader and all of a sudden see them in one place, but that's still a lot of setup, a lot of work. What can we do? How can we bring all of this information into one place? Second, technology is not easy for folks. Some of my teachers that I was helping do this adoption with struggled to download apps to their iPhone. Others were so good at technology, they were way better than me. And then the third piece is this data. Some understood all the data, the correlations, the causations, or hey, this happened here, that happened there. How do we solve these 3 problems? And that's really, I know I'm jumping, but that's how Otus got solved. Is the idea is like we solve those 3 problems. We pull all the information together, and we have a really, really easy platform to use, but that could be easier because something can always be easier. And then we make the visualizations in a way that teachers can understand. And we started off by grouping kids because teachers understand how kids can be grouped together because that's what we've always done. We've differentiated our entire career.
But
so that's how we started.
Let me interrupt you. Yeah, because you're starting to integrate all this tech in the school you're at to solve some of your problems. I love the idea that I'm lazy, so I've got to make this easier, which a lot of problems get solved with tech because, you're lazy. You don't want to do all that work. I'm raising my hand.
Every engineer I say to says I shouldn't be embarrassed by using the word lazy. They say that's exactly how most of their solutions are originated from.
Yeah. So, but at some point then, talk briefly about the decision to leave teaching and take this tech and the integrations you're doing and turn it into a product, because there's a big leap there. Plus, there's intellectual property that I imagine the school owns at that point too. At some right. I mean, you're an employee of the school district, so it gets interesting to me in how you go from here to let's build a company that can do this better.
Yeah, so that's a key part of the story, right? I feel like I hope your audience still is making it through, but it's one of those things, that's the key crux of everything. So Pete and I are doing this initiative with one device to every student. And we have amazing educators in our districts, but there are a lot of pain points. And every morning before school started, Pete and I would often get together at like 6:30 in the morning when we'd show up to work to get ready, lamenting and dreaming of a world of what if we could build our own. Because we were scouring the internet and the app store for anything that would allow us to do this. And there were a ton of applications that could do one piece or this piece or that piece, a lot of one-off tools that were being created. And they could help solve it, but it wasn't solving the crux of the problem, because if you have 15 one-off apps, you're not making your life that much more efficient. And so what ended up happening, and this is where I think serendipity gets really kind of crazy, and I'm going to apologize to the audience because I try to tell the story quickly, but it's hard. My mentor, Cheryl, her good friend who was in our building was the 8th grade English teacher. And she looked at, she was like the boots on the ground who looked after me. Leslie Jaffe, incredible woman. Technology-wise, I would say not that great. It was an area that she knew she could always need support with, which is why she'd always turn to me. I would always help her out. But there was nobody in that building who connected to a kid better. Tons of people who could connect just as well, but Leslie connected to her kids amazingly. And she told me, she's like, hey, my high school friend, Andy, is looking to learn about ed tech. You talk to him. That's all she said. I was like, of course, Leslie, you've looked out for me. This is like in 2013, right? We're talking several years, 2012, sorry, 2012. I'm like, anything for you, Leslie. The number of times you've helped me, the number of times you've told parents that I'm a good guy, I will talk to your high school friend. I talked to her high school friend. His name's Andy Bloom. He's a Chicago businessman. I didn't know that at the time until he picked up and he introduced himself as, hi, this is Andy Bloom. And at that point, I asked a question because I believe that you should just ask. If you don't know something, you need to ask. You know, it's one of those things that you need to be honest with what you know and you don't know. And I'm like, are you related to Andy Bloom? So, Andy, are you related to Neil Bloom, another Chicago's businessman? And he's like, yeah, that's my dad. And I was like, oh, my father, that accountant we talked about earlier, has worked for your father for 30 years. How crazy is this world? And that connection started the conversation. And he was talking about how he had invested in a company that was digitizing material, digitizing quarterly reports. And they had just digitized the math textbook. And he thought there was something coming in ed tech right here, right now. And he wanted to learn what this possibility was. And I was like, well, we're not having any issues with the content because that's being digitized. You're seeing that everywhere. We've pieced it together. Look at my online curriculum. Look at Pete's sixth grade online curriculum. What is missing is this comprehensive profile. And it can't be done in one-off tools. And he, because he's way smarter than I am, he showed me, well, this is happening in the medical space with Epic. They're making this digital profile. Hey, this is happening in the CRM space with Salesforce. You're telling me this does not exist in education? And it was through that conversation that this idea of, hey, what if, began to be something that we talked about. And we talked about it for over a year. And it was one of those things that was pretty crazy to really think of. And so then we started to build a prototype through one of his other companies that he had that had offshore development. And we did it just for the teacher-student interaction, because that's where so much of this information is being gathered. The rest you can pull in, right? Importing data, API, all that stuff can be done. But like that teacher-student interaction piece was essential.
Okay, time out.
Yeah, this is a unicorn story. I knew you were going to have questions.
You're engaging with this person who has capital, has access to offshore development. You're sharing your ideas. I imagine that you had some sort of agreements in place before they went off and started building a prototype.
Yeah, we had a very basic agreement, but I'll be very candid with you. My dad had worked with his father for 30 plus years. And a little bit, I believed I was going to make a difference. I really thought I was going to be able to do something cool. And so looking back, that agreement was well written, but you have to trust the people you work with. And I'll tell you right now, I trust Andy more than probably almost anybody else in my life versus my wife and my family, definitely more, but he's right up there because of it. And so, yeah, we did have an agreement. We did talk about these ideas, but it was really an exploration to where the number of things that I've learned, the number of mistakes I made about, hey, let's see this, or not realizing where the world's going to go, really became apparent.
Well, you also had a place to dog food because you see these solutions a lot, but you've got to get a school district or at least a school to agree to use this stuff, right? There's a sales job there that gets really complicated. But you had a place to dog food it, which I'm assuming you were dog fooding this at school. So there's an advantage there.
Yeah. There is, right? So 2014, 2015, I was just using it, right? Doing my thing, using it in the classroom. We would go to put it in the App Store for free, get free feedback, right? You can put it in the App Store, see what people are doing, teacher tool. That was never our real vision though, but we needed that piece to be done and that piece to work. 2015, we really decided we wanted to become like something more. And we knew that to become financially profitable, we had to sell, because the school districts, you sell to the administration. And at the end of the day, We built out an administrative layer, which basically takes this information about individual students, and it allows you to look at the trends and the aggregate information about how groups of kids are doing. In addition, you can always drill down and see that individual kid. So if all of a sudden, going back to your example about your mom, if your mom calls the principal saying, why did Bill's history teacher put his artwork on the front, the front entranceway, your principal could all of a sudden go into Otus and see what Bill's doing. See what Bill's grade has been in history. See how your participation's been. See, again, it's hard to know everything, right? You kind of want that. So the administrator can drill all the way down to that individual kid, or they can kind of look up and see the trends of how groups of kids are doing.
But at what point do you leave the school and start doing this full time? I mean, at that point, you're like, okay, we're going to establish an actual business around this, and I'm going to get a salary. And I'm like, talk about that decision.
Yeah, so that happened a couple years later. So I was fortunate enough to really be focused on the product and passionate about that. But I thought, as you kind of noted, that if I wasn't a teacher, what value do I really have? And so we really were looking at it, right? We wanted to build this administrative view. We also wanted to build a family view, because how many families don't have that insight to how their kids are doing? And we felt if we had this full view, this full understanding of a kid, and provided access to every stakeholder who mattered, that's how you really make a gain-shaming situation. This is not some little one-off product. This was hugely ambitious. If it wasn't for my co-founder, Andy, we never would have had the ability to really pursue this ambitious project. But that ambition led us to do some incredible things. So what ended up happening, Bill, to answer your question, was we started to sell Otus in 2016, 17. We had a couple pilots, right? Just trying it out, seeing how it's going. And all of a sudden it began to get some traction. And then it was in 2017, 18 school year, I knew that it was kind of coming. My wife and I discovered we were going to have twins on January 2018. That would give me 4 kids under 4. I can't believe that. And not, again, I tell the group on this audience, I'm not always the smartest person. Having 4 kids under 4, you could put into the evidence bucket of why that's the case. And I really took that opportunity. I took my full family leave from teaching from January until the end of April and went full-time Otus. In the past, what I ended up doing was I worked outside of the business hours. So I would drive down to our office every day, get there about 3:15, and I would work from 3:15 to like 5:36, and that's how I would work. And I was able to talk to folks, being able to work on stuff, but I wasn't as hands-on, 100%. I really trust my team. 2018, I did this full-time opportunity, and this is really when we started to realize we had something. It was one of those moments, you had me relive my entire kind of from 17, 18 till now. And it was one of those things where you have to kind of seize the opportunity. And I remember what my Nana said, like when I was trying to make that basketball team, she's like, do you want this? Is the journey going to be worth it? Because you don't know what the destination is going to bring. And that always shaped what I did. Like playing college basketball at a D3 school, right? There are not that many kids, only 24. It's not like I played in front of thousands of people, but it's like, it's got to be about the journey. And so when this happened, I had regrets about my basketball career. My senior year, I busted my butt for 7 years to kind of make the high school team, to be able to do this. I kind of let off the gas my senior year. And in this opportunity, I looked at it and I said, I'm never in my life, right? This is a unicorn situation, to find somebody who is as passionate as I, who trusted me, who has the capacity, the financial capacity, the emotional and enthusiastic vision, and all of these things. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity, unicorn situation. I get to talk to people all the time about how did their businesses start, how did this happen? And I know I lead a very unique situation that I've never heard of before. And I, in 2018, said, I can't ever look back and say I didn't give it my all. And so I left summer of 2018. It was actually an interesting time. That school, Elm Place Middle School, was being closed. The district used to have 3 middle schools, and it was going to 2. My kids go to that district, so I'm still in it. I actually I used Otus as a teacher, administrator, or family. But again, in 2018, I said I'm all in at this. I stopped, and then 2019 we are going, and it was one of those things where the pandemic. So backtracking, Bill, I told you I like to be honest about mistakes I made. In 2012, 2013, I told Andy by 2020, 1 to 1, one device for every kid was going to be the norm by the end of 2020, so the 1920 school year. December 2019, I'm meeting with Andy, having to tell him I'm wrong. It is not adapting as quickly as I thought. It's still only impacting like this certain these districts that are just, yeah, they're affluent, but it's like, how do we make a bigger impact than that? Fortunately for the world, the pandemic hit, horrible tragedy that impacted. One of the impacts, though, that 1 to 1 became a reality, saved by a pandemic in my prediction. Not that I should say that, but it was interesting because that prediction really led us to where we're at. And I know this is a podcast where you have a lot of engineers on it. We always saw engineering and the tool that was there as that thing that was going to make educators more efficient. And AI is just one of those tools. So we are in the midst, we have all this AI work going on, and we want to give every educator multiple, what we call like assistants. It's kind of like how jealous I am of college professors where they have like 5 or 6 like TA assistants going around doing all this work. But the idea is like, we want these assistants to really help. And so we're creating AI assistants. And we've been talking to folks like the University of Chicago, Harvard, all these folks, AWS, all of these folks. We've been talking to them since 2016, 17. We've talked to IBM. We've talked to so many people, Google. It wasn't until the last year where these large language models have become good enough to take some of our data and be those assistants that we can now really still solve those 2 problems. We have all the data about a kid in one place, check. But now AI can be an additional tool to make using this platform easier. And this AI can allow you to use natural language to be able to have these, not data visualizations, but natural language understandings of just ask a question of what you needed to know how to do. And you're really able to be able to answer that.
So I think what the pandemic did is caused parents to have to buy devices if they didn't have them already. It wasn't like a school, at least in Florida. I got 2 kids, one kid she's a senior, but the high school they're in gives them a device. So they have a device. But my other kids, you were responsible for getting them a device. So I think that's probably what really happened is kids ended up needing a device at home to go to school so much more than now the school had to provide a device.
Yeah, and so there are clearly districts where that's the case, but so many more districts decided to take that leap to provide a device for their kids, right? It became kind of the expectation. And I think that change was needed for us. You need a device for this really to be able to work, because otherwise we're asking teachers to enter so much information, it becomes cumbersome. It's got to be more, our tool is embedded into that natural school day, facilitating of learning, measuring of learning. And you mentioned something earlier, Bill, that I think is really true. We can't be measuring kids consistently and constantly where it is becoming the focus of what they're doing. What you need to be able to do is to seamlessly be measuring how they're doing. So they're just learning. Don't have them stop what you're doing, go take a test. No. Engage in the material, progressing what you're doing, experiment, explore. And while that's happening, the measurement needs to be seamlessly taking place so that we can kind of have this picture. Because if it's constantly do an exercise, get measured, do an exercise, get measured, you're taking away from what the focus of everything needs to be, which is helping that student get better and improve.
My kids in the Broward County School District at the time was using a software called Canvas, which I thought was horrific. And I'd have to log on there just to see if they weren't lying to me about homework. But it was mind-bending how horrible that software was. But my guess was they somehow gave it to the school district for free or somehow got it in there so the cost was so low that it was easy. So I'm kind of interested in how many school districts you're able to have your solution in, and at some level, what's like the pricing structure to get a school district feeling comfortable that they can afford to bring the software in?
We're in 300 districts across the United States. Next year, anticipate having that be doubled, maybe even more. So we're a really exciting time for growth. Try to keep
Let me ask you a
pricing
question.
really,
Wait.
yeah,
Let me. I'm going to
yeah,
interrupt you for a second there.
yeah.
Were these districts where you had to replace existing solutions, or are there districts that didn't have a solution in yet? Because those are two different
Both,
sales.
both. We do both, which makes the sale hard, right? Selling to K-12 districts is very difficult. Um, they really have a fixed budget, right? They get a budget once a year that they kind of have to do. They often do multi-year contracts. But we have some districts where we replaced a couple different one-off solutions, so we can kind of replace it. We have other where they didn't have anything and they needed us. And then to your question, we really want to keep, about 35% of folks at Otus are former educators. I really believe education technology needs to be taking the best of education and taking the best of technology and bringing them together. And too often, ed tech is shortchanging one or the other. And we try to keep our pricing pretty simple. It's 10 to 12 bucks per kid for the entire school year. And we think that's a reasonable amount, again, with some of our needs of, infrastructure and things like that, some of our other services, but like 10 to 12 bucks. Our goal is to really help districts. Again, we are a for-profit company. I'm not trying to say we're not. We're trying to grow, but we want to be reasonable. We can't be gouging districts because they have so much on their plate. And in a lot of ways, we got to be meeting it because K-12 education really needs to be tailored to. It's a very unique industry. Again, there are things that apply to everything. I know you were going to ask me about security. Look, we have bank level stuff in security because we have a lot of personal information. It's one of those things we take really seriously, but we also deal in an industry where API usage and standardization of protocols and standardizations of data formats is not as advanced as some of these others. So there are some gaps to where it is. This whole movement in the education technology space to have some of these protocols and guidelines be standardized is happening, but education is a little bit behind some other industries that have a little bit more of those predetermined sets of information.
AI stuff that you want to introduce with LLMs is going to increase your costs. That stuff's not free. It's not going to be, especially if you're using one of the cloud. I was actually curious if you knew anything about your tech stack. Are you running an AWS? What kind of databases are you using?
I can talk at a novice level. We use AWS, Node backend, Angular front end. We have a couple other things in there. We do some stuff with, open source as well. We really like open source, but we use AWS. We're looking at some of their AI pieces for these assistants just because, we want it to be secure. In terms for us, we need to make sure that student security, nonstop, paramount, has to be done. And we apply, it's interesting. Each state, each, locality sometimes has it. We've been approved by New York City as a vendor. We've been approved by this as a vendor. We're a part of all these pledges, but it's a nonstop commitment. We have people who are thinking about that every day, all day. And it's one of those things that anybody who tells you that they're 100% without a doubt secure is foolish because you have to be thinking about it at all times. You also have human error that can come into play. You have to be, it's a field that's forever advancing. And so you have to always be trying to say 1, 2, 3 steps ahead, and it's hard. But we have an entire team dedicated to that. Other requirements for us, 99.99% uptime. We got to be scalable to, X number of users, which is always pretty much 2X where we're at because we're always growing. And then we really want to be, we're internationalized. We want to be accessible. And then for our AI stuff, it has to be accurate. We've been thinking about AI. We've been doing AI, and we're on the cutting edge. We have a couple cool assistants coming out really in the next couple of weeks. I should actually say this podcast coming out. Depending on that, it'll be coming out in a couple of weeks. But it's also accuracy is key. It's one of those things where I know we can say if you go into ChatGPT or Claude, or if you want to go to Gemini, or if you want to go to some of these other homegrown ones like Oh, AI, we got to make sure we're going to be providing really highly accurate things. And so we do a couple different models of it, and we do it. And it's one of those things where I can speak a little bit. Like we still have some legacy PHP code, not a lot, but some. It's one of those things when we've been developing for such a long time. But yeah, Angular front end, Node back end, and I'm sure I'm missing
Yeah.
something that my CTO is clamoring about. So,
No, I spent the last 6 months learning AI, LLM, working with a company, which is one of our clients called Prediction Guard, where the whole idea is making sure that data you're sending to the LLM is private. I don't know if Fang will have a maybe you can trust Fang in about a year, but especially with the data that you're working with, if you told me you were sending some of that to Gemini right now, I'd be
no, hell no.
cringing in my,
Well, no. We do use OpenAI for one very, very specific use case. So the specific use case we do is we have a question generator. So you can ask OpenAI to basically create a question on a topic, but there is no personal information within that at all. And so it's kind of like it was one of our proof of concepts that did really, really well. We were able to basically create the right context around some of this stuff in the back end where we could give it the context to be a good question generator. We 100%. It's one of those things where, you know, a couple people in our company were like, well, why, look at all these capabilities. And again, we've hooked up some of our sample data that again is not real. Some of our like sandbox data doing some experiments and doing some POC. And the results are incredible because the amount of context we can provide some of this information, we can tell it a student's grade level, their past performance, we can tell it all sorts of stuff. Like you're asking about their reading performance, we can also have the information about their attendance. It's incredible. The results are incredible because one of the things that education has often done is it has to be research backed. So we actually have all the research, all the reasoning, and all of that. Well, if you have all that context, Bill, as it seems, seeming you add that to an LLM structure, it's going to be even more attuned to what needs to happen. But security, security, security means that, yeah, while the results are exciting, and while I believe Otus is going to be at the forefront of everything, and I think we're going to be known as a key a key driver of this in our industry, we also have to be the first one to tell everybody it is not fully secure. And if you're going to trust one of these companies right now, you're not reading the fine print. Now, I do think AWS is, bedrock, and some of the things that they're doing is getting really, much because it's staying within our cloud, and we're looking into some of those things as well. So it's one of those things where you ask me 2 weeks from now, Bill, the answers might be changed. You got to be constantly learning and listening about this
I'm
stuff.
assuming you're doing all the right things at the API level and certs and tokens and that assume that. For me, most of these breaches that happen aren't outside; they're from the inside.
Yes.
That's you need protocols on the inside to.
Yeah, we've luckily
yourself.
been having that. We have so many. I think if you were to talk to us 6-7 years ago, I would have been like, "Oh, we do so many protocols." But the number of protocols we've added in the last couple of years, where everything's behind a VPN. The VPN is monitored, so you have to have a certain access to be able to get into that VPN to be able to get into XYZ. I don't even things like I
How
can't
big
even
is the
speak to half of
company?
them.
You like
We have
200 people
70
at this point?
employees. 70 employees.
That's not bad with all the stuff you have to do. 70 is pretty good.
Yeah,
Can you
so it's one of
believe
those things.
just over the last 4 or 5 years you've grown to 70?
No, it's
people?
hard, especially because I'm somebody who just loves to connect. And it's like, how do I stay connected to all these folks? And it's really hard where I want to know every single person in the company. And I'm fortunate that I do. I'm fortunate that I'm able to I meet with all of them as much as I can. And it's one of those things I tell them I have an open Slack policy. I'll meet with anybody anytime they need me. But it's hard. I miss the ability. Like I miss that's what I miss most about. I miss teaching. I miss connecting with students. I miss that connection piece for sure.
What's your main day-to-day focus at Otus?
Yeah. So people often ask, what do I even do? I mean, I think that's a wonderful question, right? That's kind of like a silly thing. Like, what do I even do? And so I tell folks that there are two things that I focus on. One is I really want to make sure as a company we're prioritizing the right thing, which is really a product mindset to bring to all these things. Because I think that with engineering, you can do anything, you just can't do everything. So I really am geared towards making sure I'm in close communication for what are we prioritizing, what are our goals. So we have key KPIs across each one. So I am working with those stakeholders on that. I am some people will say a jack of all trades, master of none. I say I'm like the nine of spades. I'm not even quite a jack. So I'm talking with our sales team because we have some really key growth numbers, making sure they have what they need. The delivery team has a couple key focuses around scalability. We have a couple projects to really make sure we're delivering some of these ways to make Otus easier. And then we have AI. And then I really want to make sure at the biggest level is I am connecting people with the right inner people in the department, synthesizing what the market needs and what the company needs, and really shedding that path forward. And then
So
the
you're
second
like
thing I do,
CEO slash CTO slash CMO
I'm
slash.
not CTO. No, 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 no. I just want to be that connector. I was going to say I'm that connector. And then I'm a culture. I believe my job is to really ensure that people understand what our mission is, understand what we're doing. And our mission and vision to me is really what unites people. Because if people aren't able to have that united understanding of what we're doing, then all of a sudden it becomes hard. I am not smart enough to do half of the things you mentioned. We have an incredible marketing person, Mike. He's insanely good. We have an amazing CTO, Corey. We have an incredible product person, Zach. But I think I can help connect them and ensure that we're prioritizing the right things and ensuring that we're doing that. So I really see myself as that connector and then that cultural person who's really trying to make sure that we're living and breathing the same mission and vision as a company. And we have a couple key values, like our values to me are important. So I always say honesty, respect, and trying your best while risking failure, because that's how I say it to my kids. But it's like really about being authentic, being empathetic, being courageous, and then being illuminating. So as we pursue our goals, and positioning ourselves as this K-12 data assessment and insight solution, it's really ensuring that we're providing those tools to those students, those teachers, those families, so they can monitor performance, so that all of a sudden we can make these insights available, so we can make a difference in students' lives.
Okay, we're totally out of time, so this is the last question. Where did the name of the company come from? Because it throws me off with the elevator company.
Short story, because I haven't done many short stories. Organizing technology for us. So it is all of a sudden taking all this technology and organizing it for us because we're the ones who need it most.
Nice. Okay. We're totally out of time, but this was really interesting, Chris. And I love a little bit of the different format. I can hear how passionate you are on all these things, but I think hearing your background gives credence to sort of how you got here. So I really appreciate you sharing so much with us today.
I really appreciate it, Bill. I appreciate you humoring me. Hopefully some of these insights are helpful. It was a crazy moment. That was 12 years of actually you went all the way back to high school. So 2001, we're talking like 24 years of my life. I feel like that's it. That's all I got. Everything.
So now you can share this with your grandfather and your dad, and they can hear about your last 24 years.
I'm immensely blessed to have them, and then my wife and kids. And it's without them in my life, I would be nothing. Their support's absolutely everything, and they allow me to fumble around and have this experiment that is absolutely amazing to me. So I really appreciate the time, Bill.
We'll put this in the show notes, but real quick, if somebody wanted to reach out, ask a question after the show, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I guess the best way to reach out would be LinkedIn is a great way to get out to us. If you want to learn more about Otus, it's www.otus.com. And then my LinkedIn.
Spell that again, OTUS?
us.com, otus.com. Yeah, so if you want to learn more about Otus, go to otus.com. Really organizing technology for us. And then if you want to connect, LinkedIn's a great way, or folks want, I could also give my email. Folks want, I don't mind that either.
Yeah, we'll have that on the show notes. Well, this is the Ardan Labs podcast with Chris Hall and Bill Kennedy, and hope to see everybody again real soon.